Hello, everybody. Good evening. We are actually going live on multiple platforms at one time. So I just want to make
Hello,
sure
everybody. Good evening.
that we are all set. I believe we are. Okay, hold on 1 minute. Okay, I think we are all set. If you can let me know where you're joining us from, that would be terrific. My name is Dr. Jessica Freedman, for those of you who don't know me. And I'm just going to head on over to our Facebook page as well. And we are going to see what our questions are from earlier today. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Dr. Jessica Freedman. I am the chair and founder of MedEdit's Medical Admissions. I am also an emergency physician. I am a former medical school and residency admissions officer, and I founded MedEdits more than 15 years ago. And I have learned so much from all of our students that we have worked with that has really just broadened not only my understanding of medical school admissions and residency admissions, but my entire teams. You can really only when you're working for a medical school, as I was, which I did, and I was very invested and very involved, you really get a perspective that is limited to that single medical school. So by working with students and families from all over the country, and from many, many different backgrounds, aspiring to go to many different types of medical schools, we have just learned so much, and that has really broadened our knowledge and enables us to guide a very, very wide variety of students. So I believe this is my first Q&A of the new year. I cannot believe it's 2024. I wish you all a very happy new year. I hope it was great. I hope you had a great holiday season. And I hope sort of, moving back into reality, after vacation week, because most people do take off for vacation sometime during the holidays. I hope that is going well for everybody in terms of, how everything is going. So for those of you who are new to our Q&As, the way that I usually run these is that I will ask on our private Facebook group. And if you are not a part of our private Facebook group, I do encourage you to join. I will ask for questions on the private Facebook group that I then will start the Q&As by answering those, because oftentimes people are not able to attend. Sometimes it takes people a little while to join in. So I find that's a great way to kind of launch things. So Jeff asks, regarding medical schools in which the student has heard nothing, no rejection, but also no interview invite, what would you say is the latest date of possibly getting an interview for both MD, PhD programs as well as for MD only programs? So we see students get interviews into March. There are going to be fewer and fewer interviews that are going to be extended in those later months, meaning March, even into April, potentially, depending on how a school's waitlist is moving. But in January and February, we definitely see a good number of interview invitations. They don't come in bulk like they might have earlier in the season for some applicants, not for all applicants, but we definitely see that some students are going to be getting interview invites in January, February, and March. And those interview invites can and do convert to acceptances. So all is not lost at this stage of the process. Now, if you are an applicant and you don't yet have any interview invites, that's when we want to start looking at your application now and seeing if there's anything that we need to be doing to improve your candidacy for reapplication, when a reapplication might be ideal. Would it be ideal to apply this coming cycle, or would it be best to wait a cycle? Is there something that we can fix, pretty quickly? Is there something easy to identify that maybe you needed to do differently in order to, get some more interviews and some acceptances? But this is the time that we want to start looking at your application if you don't yet have any interviews. So Ravi asks, my daughter got AP credits for Gen Chem and Bio. Based on the MSAR, some colleges require inorganic chemistry and biology to be taken in college. Can she use upper level courses for biochemistry to meet these requirements, or does she need to take them? And can they be taken at a community college? So there are some medical schools that are going to allow students to take upper level bio, upper level chemistry to replace those introductory courses that perhaps the student got credit for by using AP credits that they, earned in high school. But since every medical school is not yet doing this, we do not recommend using AP credits to satisfy those requirements because not every medical school is going to accept those AP credits to suffice for those introductory courses. It doesn't matter if these courses are taken at an undergraduate institution or if they're taken at a community college. Many students will take a course or two, even if they're enrolled in a four-year undergraduate college. Many students will take a course or two at a community college during the summer, and that's perfectly fine. If you're enrolled at a home institution, however, we recommend that you don't take all of your prerequisites at community college, but certainly, one or two is perfectly acceptable, and many students do this. Jennifer asks, is calc really important? When a school recommends rather than requires, should you just suck it up and take it? Is a survey calc okay, or does it have to be calc with analytical geometry? So many medical schools, I think about probably 2/3 of medical schools, although I haven't reviewed that data yet this year, many medical schools are going to require some math. They don't all require calculus, they just require some math. So there are many students, if they've placed out of calculus, and that is one AP that we're okay with students placing out of if they're using AP credits. But we do recommend that all medical school applicants take math as undergraduates. That can be calculus, doesn't matter which type of calculus, or it can be statistics or biostatistics, or both of those classes. Okay. Ashwini, you're welcome. Thank you. If a student has a lot of clinical experience, but just at the same place, is that good enough? I have heard clinical experience is important, but do you need to have variation in that? So most students who have real clinical experience, meaning hands-on clinical experience, most of them are not doing that at multiple different settings. Most of them are doing that in a single setting, either as a scribe, as a medical assistant, as a phlebotomist. They're not doing that at multiple different sites. Now, shadowing, however, can be done at multiple different sites or, in different settings, different specialists. And that type of variety is actually a good thing to have because it shows that you really understand how medicine is practiced in different settings and in different specialties, because it is very different depending on the specialty, depending on the setting. Okay, for a California student with a good resume, do you suggest not applying to North State University? I have heard it is not accredited, among other things. So North State has had some issues. I have to be honest, we have not had students this year who have been particularly interested in North State. So I have not, reviewed what their accreditation status currently is. I definitely can tell you that they have had some issues with their BSMD program. We have worked with some students who did not get into the MD portion of the BSMD program when they were expecting to, and we had to work with them to get into other medical schools, which they did successfully. So I understand your reservations about North State, but honestly, I can't speak to what the current issues are because I have not looked at that recently. But you've piqued my curiosity, so I think I am going to look into it, and maybe I'll be able to chime in at next week's Q&A. John asks, my daughter had a C in physical chemistry last semester, the only grade lower than a B in her academic record. That's amazing. She is in her last semester of college this spring and only needs to take biophysical chemistry to graduate. How would this affect her medical school application? We didn't see this coming and we're unsure of what can be done at this time. She plans to apply this 2024. Her GPA is a 3.65 currently. Do not worry about a single C+ in the academic record. Now, of course, we want to look at many different things. We want to look at the overall trend. I'm thinking she's probably a chemistry major. She probably is a STEM major, which is, a rigorous major. So we want to see what her other courses were, what else she has done. But one C+ in an entire academic record with a 3.65 GPA, assuming the MCAT is a strong, she's had a strong performance on her MCAT. This would not worry me. We certainly have had many students who've gotten into medical school who've had a C plus on their record. So, so that alone is not going to keep her out of medical school. Okay, so I think that actually those are all the pre-posted questions. So I'm gonna go on and I'm going to head on over to the current live and just see how everything is doing here. Okay, so we've got some questions. Terrific. All right. So someone asked, do you need to get all A's to get into med school? Like I just said, you do not need all A's to get into med school. Are you going to do better in the process if you have a high GPA? Yes, but there are also every year students who have nearly perfect GPAs who don't get into med school. So that in and of itself is not a guarantee that you're getting accepted to medical school. So kind of keep that in mind as well. But you do not need all A's. We have many students who have, B's on their record, who even have a C plus scattered here and there. We also work with students who, do have multiple gap years and even do postgraduate programs who did not have great undergraduate records. And, based on their undergraduate GPAs, probably most people would say you're never getting in. We're working with one student now who I'm sure was told that and has, multiple acceptances. They worked super duper hard to disprove that undergraduate record and it worked. So nothing is lost. If this is something that you want to do, even if you don't have a perfect undergraduate record, it certainly can be done. And it also depends on what you're aspiring, where you're aspiring to go. Do you want to go to MD school? Do you want to go to osteopathic medical school? And so that's also going to impact what our recommendations are and what the likelihood is of potentially getting accepted to medical school. So keep that in mind. Okay, regarding activities in junior and senior year are good enough because first 2 years they concentrate more on prerequisite subjects like BC, PM, and a little bit of activities in first 2 years. So I think what this person is asking, is it okay if the majority of the activities, meaning the scholarly activities, the extracurricular activities, are in the junior and senior years of college rather than in the first 2 years when a student is settling in? So again, this is going to depend on what the student's goals are. We certainly recommend the student be involved in something during their first 2 years of college. So we don't want you only going to the library. I realize that it's, a pre-med curriculum is super hard and it would be easy to just go to the library and do nothing else, but we want you doing something in those first 2 years. I can tell you that depending on what a student's goals are, so if someone, let's say, wants to apply to medical school at the end of their junior year of college with no gap year, those students are absolutely diving right into their scholarly and extracurricular activities as soon as they start college. Now, if someone is willing to take a gap year or two, then there might be some flexibility in that where they aren't necessarily all that involved their freshman and sophomore years of college. So this is really going to be hugely variable and dependent on what the student's goals are. But we also don't want students to take on more than they can manage. So certainly if a student sort of needs to get settled into college, which many, many students do, then we don't want them getting heavily involved in extracurricular activities until they've figured out how to manage their time, until they've, kind of gain those study habits, for college, which are going to be different than what they were for high school for many, many students. So there's really a lot of individual variation in terms of, when students start to get really involved in their activities. Okay. What is the course requirement different from the AMC and medical college website? Saw this in Upstate Med in New York. If there is a variation, I think that what you're saying is maybe on the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirements, and the medical school website, perhaps those requirements are different. I would call the medical school. I would probably trust what's on the medical school website as being the best source. But if there's a something that doesn't match up there, I'd call the medical school directly. My son will be taking his inorganic chemistry only in the senior year. Can he apply for med school or not? So I assume that your student is taking inorganic or general chemistry in their senior year because it's a requirement that they skipped their freshman and sophomore year. Maybe they placed out because of their AP credit and they're taking it now because they realize they need that for med school and they've already taken their MCAT. So many students are going to do this. They're going to realize, I thought I could place out of that general requirement by using AP credit. And I realized that a lot of med schools require this from me. And so they end up taking that prerequisite course as a senior, just as your son is doing before they matriculate. And that is perfectly okay. As long as all of the requirements are taken before matriculation, the student is absolutely fine, perfectly acceptable. When is the best time to submit the medical school application? The best time to submit the medical school application is when the systems open. Even if acceptances are not extended on a rolling basis, applications are reviewed on a rolling basis. So you want your application to be reviewed with the smallest group of applicants possible when you're going to have the best chance of being extended an interview, and you're going to have the least amount of lag time between when you submit and when your application is actually reviewed. So as soon as the systems open is ideally when we recommend submitting an application, or within 2 to 3 weeks of that date is our general recommendation, ideally. Hi, Brigido. Happy New Year to you. Thank you. My daughter had an interview with the Zucker School of Medicine on November 29th, and she still has not heard back. What should she do? First of all, Zucker School of Medicine, phenomenal medical school. I love this medical school. It's, you get a great education there. And we have many students who are there who are super happy. So that is fabulous, Brigido. What I would do is I would have her call the medical school and just ask about the status of her application. She should just pick up the phone, explain, I interviewed with Zucker on November 29th. I have not yet heard back. I just wanted to check on the status of my candidacy. That's it, and they'll let her know what's going on. They'll give her some idea. Okay. Could you share your thoughts on the average number of colleges the student should apply to for MD schools only? There are a lot of variables that go into this when we are advising how many schools a student should apply to. I can tell you that most students are applying to an average of 25 to 30 medical schools, but there's a huge amount of variation. It depends on, first of all, what the student's record is, how competitive they are. It depends on how many reach schools they want to apply to. So sometimes we will work with students who want to apply to every reach school in the country, but we want to make sure that they have a safe enough list that we're pretty confident that they're going to be getting accepted. So we will say to them, okay, you can apply to all, the top 20 medical schools in the country, as long as you also apply to these 25 medical schools where we think you're the most competitive. So a lot of this is going to depend on a student's competitiveness and how many reaches they want. The other factor is also, regarding state medical schools. For many, many students, their state medical schools are going to be their safest medical schools. And if they're happy going to those state medical schools, then their list might be smaller. It might be a shorter list. So, there's a lot of different kind of conversations that we have when we're making this determination of how many schools to apply to. It's often a personal decision, but it also is based on the student's overall competitiveness. Great questions tonight, everybody. All right. My daughter is reaching out to many physicians for shadowing in high schools. We are from California. And they're all turning her away because of HIPAA. Yes, what can we do about this, and how can we gain an approach for shadowing? So for a high school student, HIPAA is an issue. And, sometimes there will be physicians, especially for a high school student. For older students, this is often an easier issue. For a high school student, what I would do is I would look for formal shadowing programs that might exist close to home. I would call the local hospitals. I would also check with your daughter's high school. They may have some opportunities that they may know about locally. There certainly are a lot of pre-med, kind of programs where students can get exposure, to hospitals, to medical work environments. So I would look into those. But certainly, if your daughter is looking to apply to BSMD programs, certainly exposure to the practice of medicine is going to be really, really important. However, if she's looking to apply to traditional colleges and she's pre-med, it isn't necessarily as important. So the college admissions process is vastly, vastly different than the medical school admissions process. So, depending on what her goals are, if they're not BSMD, she may not absolutely need this at this point. It might be something that she saves for college to get that exposure. All right, Delavi asks, is there a benefit if I apply in junior year versus gap year as part of GPA? This depends on your GPA. So one of the reasons that we often recommend a gap year is if a student, let's say, had a slow start, which many students do as they're adjusting to college in their freshman year. And sometimes that freshman year GPA, even moving into sophomore year GPA, might be on the lower side. And in that case, we often will recommend that a student take a gap year so that we also have the senior year grades that are being factored into the GPA when that student applies to medical school. But if your GPA is strong at the end of junior year and you have all of the experiences that you need to be a competitive applicant, you don't necessarily need a gap year. The vast majority of applicants are now taking gap years. There are a huge number of reasons that contribute to that. One of those is that many students don't do as well at the beginning of college. So it really depends on your GPA. We're also going to look at your extracurricular, your scholarly profile, your experience profile to determine, how competitive you are at the end of your junior year. And we're also going to look at what your goals are. Are you aspiring to go to DO school, to top MD schools? So there are variations in terms of the suggestions that we make depending on what your goals are. Okay, just scanning through the questions. A lot of questions tonight. It's great. Okay, Michael asks, when do applications typically open? Do most schools have similar open dates? So Michael, there are common applications for medical school in the same way that there are common applications for the college process. All of the applications are going to open in early May. AMCAS, which is the allopathic application service, that you can submit at the end of May. So AACOMAS, which is the osteopathic application system, that you can submit at the beginning of May when it opens, as well as TMD-SAS, which is the Texas application service, that you can also submit at the beginning of May. But all the application services open in early May. Right. Michael also asks, are the essays similar for all the medical school applications? Is it a copy and paste scenario or writing 25 to 30 different essays? So you have one common application. So obviously that goes to everyone. That's your primary personal statement. That's where you describe all of your experiences. And then the vast majority of medical schools have what we call secondary essays. So the equivalent of that for the college process are supplemental essays. And all medical schools have their own secondary essays. Is there overlap in terms of the topics? Absolutely. Can students recycle some of those essays or parts of those essays? They most definitely can. We discourage taking the approach, as some students do, of like writing, let's say a challenge essay or, sort of a diversity essay, and then trying to apply that to different medical schools, because the medical schools are all going to have different word and character limits for those essays. And that word and character limit is often going to dictate what you write and how much you write. So we really discourage students from sort of writing a one-size-fits-all type of essay, because that length should in part guide what your content is going to be and what you're going to include. So the answer is yes. If you're applying to 25 to 30 schools, those 25 to 30 schools are all going to have, for the most part, secondary essays. And some schools have upwards of 3 to 5 secondary essays. Every year we find that schools are adding on more and more secondary essays. It used to not be as, laborious, but, schools are just keep adding on, more for students to do. Oh, thank you, Brigido. I appreciate your comment. Thank you. All right. For clinical experience, is hospital volunteering enough, or medical assistant, LPN, EMT preferred? So more and more medical schools are most definitely preferring hands-on clinical experience. But again, it in part depends on what else the student has in their background. What is their expertise? What else have they been doing with their free time? Are they heavily involved in research, and are they shadowing perhaps the person that they're doing research with? Or is there a clinical component to that research? In which case, it's very possible that hands-on clinical exposure or clinical experience is not going to be as important. So some of this really depends on what the student's niche is, what the student's expertise is. So I'm not going to say that across the board every student has to have hands-on clinical experience. Certainly some clinical exposure is absolutely necessary if you're going to be applying to medical school, whether that's osteopathic med school, whether that's MD granting schools. So we definitely want community service. We definitely want clinical exposure. And for some students, their most important experience in their application is going to be their hands-on clinical experience, whether that's working as a medical assistant, working as, an EMT, or working as a nursing assistant or a phlebotomist. There are many different ways to potentially get clinical experience, but that isn't necessarily every student's strength. Summer after freshman year, is shadowing and bench research a good way to spend the summer if it's at a world famous hospital? Absolutely. I think this is a great way to spend a summer. The student's going to be getting exposure to different specialties in medicine. The student's going to be learning, is bench research something that they enjoy? Perhaps whatever discipline this bench research is in is something that really interests them, and it's a discipline that really interests them. And then they can either continue with that research, or they can take on another research experience that builds on that experience and sort of really builds on whatever, that topic was. And so that helps them to then, kind of develop a niche. And that's important. So I think this is a great way to spend freshman year summer. Absolutely. Ravi asks, what is considered a strong GPA? Does science GPA versus cumulative GPA matter? So a strong GPA for med school, I would say at this point, is a 3.6 or higher. We certainly have students who get in with GPAs lower than that. However, medical school admissions committees are looking at trends. They're looking at rigor. They're looking at a lot of different things. And science GPA, of the two GPAs, either science GPA versus cumulative, your science GPA is going to be the most important GPA that medical school admissions committees are going to be looking at. But again, there is going to be variation in terms of what, what's considered good, what's considered strong, what was the student's major, where do they go to college, what was their trend, so all of these different things are factored in. And this is, why the medical school admissions process is most definitely holistic. And this is also why I don't like sort of, kind of dishing out absolute numbers of what you have to be a competitive applicant. Oh, thank you, Dalavai. You're all making such nice comments tonight. Thank you. Hold on. I just need to check something on my phone because I think we're okay. Someone asked on Instagram, how important are the essays given that we have Chat GPT now? Essays in the medical school admissions process are still immensely important. Please don't use Chat GPT. I mean, I think Chat GPT can be useful to kind of maybe brainstorm ideas sometimes, because it maybe prompts your thinking. But please use your own words, and especially for med school admissions. I mean, in college admissions, there aren't interviews, right? So like, whatever a student puts on paper is taken at face value and it's believed. But in med school admissions, interviews are of the utmost importance. And so if you've written a ChatGPT essay that's really amazing and the thoughts aren't yours, when you're in the interview, your interviewer is going to say, something doesn't quite match up here. Why does this student not sound like the person that they were in their written work? So when you have interviews and you're actually talking to someone, unless you can put ChatGPT in your brain, I really discourage using ChatGPT. It's just not going to end well. That's my genuine feeling. Can you provide any insight on what someone can expect when interviewing for BSMD programs, in particular in Texas? So BSMD program interviews are not going to vary from state to state. They are primarily looking for a student's maturity. They're looking to make sure that the student really knows what they're getting themselves into, because to decide at the age of 17 or 18 that you want to be a physician, that's a really big choice. It's a sophisticated choice, and you need to have focus and maturity and understanding to be able to make that decision. They're making sure this isn't your parents' decision. They really want to know that you understand what it means to be a physician and that you have explored the field of medicine. And those are the main things that they're really assessing during a BSMD interview. Okay, I'm just looking at these questions. For medical school applications, how many hours of shadowing is recommended? Is it better to shadow family practice on a regular basis or seek different specialties? We discourage sort of trying to get a certain number of hours of shadowing. It used to be, if you talked to me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, students were literally getting hundreds of hours of shadowing, and a lot of them were really bored, because most pre-med students get really bored when they're just sort of doing something passive. So I would say that most of our students at this point who are successful in this process have somewhere between a total of 50 and 100 hours of shadowing over a period of time. So, and I would say it's probably better if you can. And again, not everyone has, the opportunity to do this, but if it's possible, it's better to shadow different specialists in different settings, not only because it looks good on a medical school application, it gives you more to talk about, but it also helps the student to sort of figure out what do they want to practice in the future. That decision-making process of deciding what you want to specialize in happens so quickly when you're in medical school. Literally the middle of your third year of medical school is when you're choosing your specialty. And suddenly students are like, wait, there's so many specialties I've had no exposure to, and I have to make a decision. So this is why I encourage students to get that exposure as pre-medical students as well as medical students, because when you're making that decision, you really want to be making an informed decision. Students are usually making that specialty choice decision based on pretty limited experience and pretty limited exposure, once they're medical students. So this is also why I like it if students can shadow multiple different specialists. How important is a committee letter? A committee letter is important if your school offers it, because it is your school, your undergraduate college's endorsement of your candidacy. It's like them putting a stamp of approval on your application. We think that this student is worthy of going to medical school. So for that reason, the committee letter is very important. We really encourage students to follow all of their undergraduate college's dates and deadlines. This is something that a student, as soon as they get to college, should be aware of. They want to be meeting with their pre-med advisor, their pre-med office, and they want to be meeting all of those dates and deadlines. Every year we work with students who did not follow the direction of their pre-med committee and of their pre-med advisors, and they're behind in terms of getting all of their letters of recommendation in. And that potentially makes for a late application, which can be really detrimental in the process. So please, please, please follow all of your committee's direction. Do you do MMI prep? My daughter has an interview at California Med School in early February, which is MMI and traditional. First of all, congratulations to your daughter. That's great. Any California interview is a huge achievement because it's a state everybody wants to go to. And yes, we do MMI interview prep. We do traditional interview prep. We do everything. So feel free to email us. You can just email us at info@mededits.com, and we'll be happy to set that up for you. Regarding BSMD, what is the minimum GPA and SAT needed to expect an interview? All right, first of all, high school GPAs at this point are all pretty much so inflated that I've been reading that more and more colleges are paying less attention to GPAs. They're looking at rigor. They're looking at your high school coursework. If you happen to go to a school that does not inflate GPAs, and this is the rarity, then your student is going to be looked at within the cohort of their class. What is the average GPA for their class? How are they in relation to the rest of their graduating class? But with most students having practically straight A's across the board, GPAs become less important. So I can tell you that standardized testing for BSMD programs is still of the utmost importance. Please do not apply test optional if you're applying to BSMD programs. I would still say it's a 1,500 or higher, or a 34 or higher on the ACT, but obviously higher is better. For the purposes of BSMD programs, your math score is going to be more important than your verbal score. I would love to see above a 750 if possible, or 35, 36 on your math section, as well as science if you're taking the ACT. When is the best time to take the Casper test? So first of all, Casper test is a situational judgment test, and it is another test that you need to take, not only for the purpose of many medical schools, but for many different admissions processes. In fact, I was just looking at anesthesiology associate programs. I believe that's the name, like, where you're basically not a nurse anesthetist, but an anesthesia assistant, and they require Casper too. So the best time to take Casper, I would say, is after you have submitted your primary application for medical school. So in June was probably the best time. Does it matter if you take algebra-based or calc-based physics? It does not matter. Okay. Let me see. Are interviews for California MD schools done? And is there still hope for out-of-state students to get interviews at California schools? I don't think anyone's done at this point. As far as I know, I think most schools, I think there's one medical school that may be done extending interviews, and I don't have that off the top of my head, but I have not heard that California schools are done extending interviews. Okay, this is a good question. Does cold calling or cold emailing work better to get volunteer intern opportunities? I'd say cold calling usually works better, but try both. If you happen to get the right person on the phone, I think that sometimes phone calls can actually have better outcomes, but you never know. You should definitely try everything. It can't hurt. My sophomore student really enjoys working as an EMT and as a medical assistant at a free clinic, and has been spending most of her clinical time doing these two activities. Would you suggest having more varied clinical experience scribing, hospice, phlebotomy, or can she continue focusing on these two activities? EMT and MA are both great, especially if she's being an MA at a free clinic, which is helping her to understand healthcare disparities, helping her to understand the social determinants of health, together with being an EMT, where you're seeing, pre-hospital care, you're really seeing what's going on in the community. I actually think that these two activities really work very well together and will set her apart, and I don't think she needs to take on another activity. More is not always better. So, medical school admissions committees are really looking at the number of hours that you're committing to any given activity. So I would rather that she really dive into these two activities that she's a part of, to really show her commitment to them, and to, have more to say about them and to write about them. How many hours of non-clinical volunteering and nonprofit hours are preferred? Again, I am not going to give you absolute recommendations on how many hours are preferred. Medical schools definitely want to see community involvement and volunteering in the community, but it depends on what the student's niche is. It depends on, sort of what their spike is. Almost every student that we work with has some kind of special interest, and they've developed something that, really is sort of, their kind of defining experience, one of their most meaningful experiences. So for some students, this is going to be community service, but it's not going to be that for every student. So it really depends on what the student's strength is. But I can tell you that all medical schools are looking for students to be involved in their community. So we definitely want that on the record. Hi, Yas. Happy New Year to you. Thank you so much. Okay. Can you comment on Hofstra BSMD program? It's terrific. we love Zucker Medical School. It's a great medical school. If your student can get into that BSMD program, that's incredible. Amazing opportunity. Is there a roadmap resource available that a student can follow, i.e. dates to complete, prerequisites, MCAT prep start date, MCAT date, apply by, etc.? Yeah, so Michael, I actually just created, I don't know when your student's applying. You can pop that in the chat if you want, but we actually just created a toolkit for students who are applying this spring. And that's going to guide you pretty well if your student's applying this spring. Otherwise, we do have an article on our website for general timelines, depending on whether your student's sort of doing a 4-year plan, meaning they're applying at the end of their junior year, or if they're applying at the end of their senior year. Those are going to be our two most common sort of pathways. So we definitely have those resources available. And if you want, you can post. I think you're a part of our group. If you want, and we don't post those just now, then you can write in the group, and I'll post those for you in the group. What are the chances of getting more interviews at that point? At this point, there's still definitely more interviews that are going out. It's impossible for me to say what the chances are, because a lot of this is going to depend on variables about your student that we don't know. So I can't really tell you what the chances are, but I can tell you that we definitely, we have students who just wrote us about interviews today that they just received. So there's still a lot of activity that's going on. Sorry. Okay, for BSMD, will they count multiple SAT scores, best of math and English? I believe at this point, all schools except for a few, I think Georgetown, MIT, all schools are allowing for super scoring, meaning your best math, your best English. So not to worry. Most students are taking the SAT multiple times. Okay, I understand. Okay, Michael, so for a senior in high school and you're trying to put together a plan for when to apply to med school, right now, just focus on college. Figure out what college is going to be the best for your student, figure out where they're getting into school. And then once they're in school, you then want to figure out what their prerequisites are going to be, what prerequisites they're taking freshman year, let them get settled. I don't recommend sort of mapping out a definitive timeline and plan until sophomore year at the earliest, because in the world of medical school admissions, because things sometimes happen the way students don't expect them to happen, we want everyone to be kind of flexible in terms of when might they take the MCAT, when are they actually going to be ready to take the MCAT and do well, when are they going to be applying as a traditional student, or are they going to need a gap year or 2 gap years. Those sort of determinations change a lot over the course of college. So we want students to really, and their parents, to kind of really be flexible in making those decisions. So this is why we don't want you to be locked into a timeline. Okay. Please let me know your opinion about research publications. Do you have any comments and suggestions? So certainly if a student is involved in research and that research leads to a publication, that's a fabulous, wonderful thing. Medical school admissions committees know how difficult it is to get published, and that often getting published is a function of luck. It's a function of what project you get assigned to, your data. Is it the data you were expecting? Are these publishable results? So while publications are certainly a good thing to have, and they can certainly improve a student's candidacy, they are not necessary to do well in this process. So sometimes students are very, very focused on publications, thinking that they need that in order to get into medical school, and they really do not. Okay. What are you hearing about this cycle? Do you think schools are sending out interview invites later than usual? Any insights? We haven't really seen any differences this cycle than in past cycles. So no, we did see a little bit of a slower start with the interviews and with secondary essays actually being extended at the very beginning of the cycle. But then since then, we haven't seen any variation this cycle versus previous cycles. Okay. I know Notre Dame does not have a medical school, but how well do they prepare students getting pre-meds for medical school? This is a tough question to answer because a lot of students at any undergraduate college start out college saying, I'm pre-med. Then they take a couple prerequisites and they decide, I don't want to be pre-med. So this isn't always a function of the college. It's a function of a student's exploration and realization that, okay, this isn't what I want to do. So you would have to actually check with a college. I don't know what their specific data is, but you would want to know from them how many students apply to medical school from your institution and what percentage of those students are accepted to medical school. You would also want to know what types of medical schools are they accepted to? Are they accepted to MD schools? Are they accepted to, osteopathic med schools? Are they accepted to offshore medical schools? So there are a lot of different variables in this that you would want to ask the college, but I wouldn't judge a college based on what they say their success rate is, because I can tell you we work with students from just about every undergraduate institution in the country. That might be an exaggeration. I don't think we've worked with students from every single one, but we work with students from a variety of undergraduate institutions. And a student can be successful in the pre-medical process no matter where they go to undergraduate college. It's a function of doing well. It's a function of taking advantage of the opportunities that are there for the student. And so I wouldn't choose a college based on what you think their pre-med success rate is. All right. Helen asks, my high school daughter is aiming to apply to BSMD programs, but for regular college applications, which majors would be best for pre-med? So Helen, this is an interesting question because when it comes to college admissions, pre-med majors like, biology, chemistry, physics, these are some of the toughest majors for college applicants. So STEM majors are some of the most competitive majors for a student applying to college traditionally. So a student, once they get to college, can decide to be pre-med. Pre-meds can major in anything. They can major in art history or classics. It doesn't matter what a pre-med majors in. So sometimes it's actually better to position yourself as a high school student, even if you want to do STEM once you're there, but it's actually better to position yourself as a major that isn't going to be as competitive as something like a STEM major or computer science or economics, which are traditionally some of the most competitive majors when you're applying for college. So, a student doesn't have to be, in other words, the best pre-med on the planet to get into college. Sometimes, the pre-med profile for undergraduate college is actually one of the more competitive profiles when it comes to getting into college. All right. So I think it's about 9:45, and I think that we answered all the questions today. So I thank you so much. We had a terrific audience today. I hope to see you all back here next week. If you are not a part of our private Facebook group, I encourage you to join our private Facebook group. If you are applying to medical school this year, please download our application toolkit, as that will help you to sort of stay on track. I enjoyed answering all your questions today. They're a great mix of questions. I hope to see you back here next week, next Thursday at 9 p.m. and Eastern Time, 6 p.m. 6 p.m. Pacific. And in the meantime, I hope I will see all of you in the Facebook group. I'm there every day answering questions, so please post your questions. And I hope you all have a great weekend and Happy New Year, happy 2024. I hope it's off to a great start for everybody. Thank you so much. Good night.